So, what is the top number one comic book being sold today? Is it this? X-Men? Funny enough, it has been. They just did a reboot that's actually doing very well, but nope. Is it this? Spider-Man? I mean, very popular character. People love it. I don't know. No, that's not it. How about Superman? I mean, come on. This is like created comics, right? Superheroes and did millions of sales when it first came out. Nope, not so much. Batman's pretty popular though. What do you think? How about Batman? Is that the number one comic? Nope, not that one either. I mean, there's a lot of cool comics. I love these. All these titles are really cool, but there's another comic that's outselling all of them. In fact, there's a lot of comics that are outselling all of them. This is the top comic out right now. One Piece. What the heck is a One Piece? um, this. I mean, if you're into comics, if you're into manga, you know what One Piece is probably. I didn't know about One Piece until recently because I haven't traditionally spent a lot of time being into comic or manga comics. But apparently this is outselling all of these comics. You know, we talk about the big two. Um, did you know that both of those companies, DC and Marvel, are not even coming close to what manga comics in America is doing, let alone Japan? I'll put a link down below for the video that I'm kind of getting this stuff from. It's by this guy. What was his name? Just some guy, I guess, on YouTube. Pretty interesting video. I've done some more research since then and found out that they're the numbers are kind of the only counting like graphic novels and stuff versus manga. I think it's only in like regular bookstores and stuff, but it doesn't like count necessarily what's sold in local comic shops, but still, when you really you go through all the numbers, the point is Japan is kicking butt, and they're thriving, and American comics are pretty much limping along, when it comes to the numbers. So, that's kind of just what I'm talking about here. So, I want to highlight some of the issues that we're having in comics, but I also really want to highlight what can we learn from this and what are some of the solutions. That's really what I want to talk about here. What's up, y'all? My name is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and I make comics. In fact, as you can see here, I'm working on the Corncob Rob comic book cover that will be coming out later this month, the month of December in 2018. So hopefully you dig the art that I'm doing while we talk about this topic. And you can find my comics at donkeyjawprojects.com/comics. Pretty easy, right? All right, so now that I've gotten that little thing out of the way, you know, there's a lot of problems in comics, in American comics specifically. I mean, I'm in America. I'm concerned with American comics, especially because I make comics and I want to be successful at what I do. So I'm learning a lot of things that I never really spent a lot of time on before, like what is the size of the comic market? Why have comics in America declined so much? And the thing is there's a lot of reasons. Right now there's some kind of crazy toxic stuff going on within the industry where people are blaming people basically, and SJWs, Comicsgate, all that craziness. Whatever your opinion on that is, it is what it is. I mean, the point is there's a problem and we need to find some solutions. So let me go quickly through some of the problems. But basically, you know, the whole comics medium is a sinking ship right now. It's like a sinking tide, or a low tide. Like there's that phrase, a high tide raises all ships. It's very true. It's a good metaphor for business. But also a lowering tide lowers all ships, and that's kind of what's going on right now. Why is it? Well, it's also happening in Japan too, but it's kind of a different situation from what I understand. The only reason it's lowering is because digital sales are going higher, and there's also the problem of piracy. But it seems like they're doing okay. So I don't know. Some people say that digital is the future of comics, but if digital is the future of comics, that also means that piracy is going to play a bigger part. So is it really the future? I don't know. In America, those trends don't seem to reflect similarly as they do in Japan, as far as I can tell. Anyways, let's get into this. That's just a kind of an other point. So some of the problems that we're seeing is, and so I'm going to kind of go through some complaints that you would typically hear from people about comics, and then just some other problems. So some of the complaints is that comics stories are too convoluted. Now, obviously, a lot of times these complaints are geared towards the American superhero genre. So these stories are too convoluted. They have these shared universes with crossover events and reboots all the time, and it's just almost impossible to keep track with like one single story. And when it comes down to it, comics are not just properties that are being played with, toys to be played. They're meant to be stories. Like, how can you read a story if you can't even figure out how to completely read a story? you know so that's a big problem. The power of comics is directly linked to the power of story, and story is powerful. But if you're making stories that aren't even really stories anymore, I don't know what to say. Or are barely stories, or are not good stories, or it doesn't even have to be amazingly good. Comic books have thrived before, and they weren't always, sometimes they weren't amazing stories and they were still thriving, but they were simple and good, decent stories. Comics are for kids. I mean, that's one that we all have to help educate people about, and we have to make comics that aren't just for kids. Also make good comics that are for kids. There's some things. We'll get into the solutions after. Some people complain that there's no diversity in comics. Oh, that's kind of changing. And other people complain that there's too much politics in comics. These are kind of related. We'll get into that a little bit. There's only the superhero genre. Not everybody wants to read superheroes. Well, the truth is there isn't only the superhero genre, but we're not doing a good job of letting people know that, maybe. So let's find out more about that in a sec. There's no stakes. Superman died years ago, and this is something I was talking to my buddy Foy Storm about. I heard him talk about it on his latest live stream, and I think I've heard some other people say it too. But when Superman died, I personally didn't believe that it was going to stick, but that was an opportunity. That was kind of a thing that kind of got messed up. So basically, Superman died, but then he didn't die. He came back. So that was what one person called the death of death. So death doesn't matter, in comics anymore. There's no stakes anymore, especially when it comes to DC Comics, but also Marvel. I mean, they just brought back Wolverine from the dead. So, that's not helpful to, like, if there's no stakes in story, then there's no drama, there's no interest, Fast-paced consumption. People, are taking in things at such an alarming rate right now through the internet. We have to either figure out how to feed them quickly with more stuff, or it's just somehow, we have to be able to battle this fast-paced consumption culture, or find a way to slow down their consumption rate, or something. There's ways, I think, though. High price, less story. There was a comic. There's been comics recently that have been coming out, floppy comics that I think, I don't know for sure, but I think they're like 24 pages, your typical comic, for $8. I mean, $5 is too much, and that's getting to be pretty much common. And the stories aren't even that great necessarily a lot of times, and they're only 24 pages of stories. And then the market is too small. The market is too small. We're not getting the books out there to enough people. We have a small, very niche market, and everybody's trying to sell to this one little tiny small market. We have more people trying to create comics probably than people trying to read them. I don't know, I don't know the numbers in it, but so don't quote me. But so anyways, I don't want to talk about the problem so much as what are the solutions, because to me, comic books are powerful. They have been powerful in the past, through many different waves and times, and there's no reason why they can't be powerful in the present. In fact, comic books are thriving and are powerful in the present, just not so much in America, and maybe a lot of other countries. But in Japan, they're thriving. Comic sales have actually been down in Japan compared to how they were as well. So even in Japan, the tide is sinking to a certain degree. But maybe that's because there's been a report that in 2017, digital sales actually surpassed or came close to surpassing physical sales in Japan. That's not even close to the case in America. Digital sales are abysmal compared to physical sales in America, and physical sales aren't that great. So, I think it's because we're not. There's a lot of reasons. I don't even want to get into the reasons. It's not about that. Right here, this video is about the solutions. So what can be the solutions for somebody like me, who's an indie comic creator? Not one of Marvel or DC. To me, you could think of this as a depressing fact. That all the ships are going down. That the tide is going down. But to me, kind of putting more of my marketing businessy hat on and learning about that kind of stuff, this is presenting a lot of opportunity. The opportunities right now, and the accessibility of what we can do with the internet and with independent publishing. As an independent creator, there's no reason why, if you work really hard and try to hit the right things in the right way, like there's some things we have advantages of, and there's some ways that we can actually skew for our own personal success in a really amazing way. First of all, we can start doing things right that the big two are doing wrong. I just said some of the problems. Well, let's see, convoluted stories. Well, in Japan, One Piece right here, this is one story. You can go from volume 1 to volume whatever they're at, 80 or whatever, and you're reading one whole story. I mean, it's not complete because it's not, I don't think this one's finished yet. Maybe it is, I don't know. But even if it isn't, at least you can read the same story throughout all those issues in it. So yeah, I mean, and it's one universe. It's not rebooting. It's, people who die stay. I don't know if they do in this book particularly or not, but a lot of times in manga, when people die, they stay dead. There's not this shared universe between, One Piece and Naruto and, all the other manga out there, One Punch Man, all those things. So you don't get these convoluted stories. It's one continuous stories. Um, there's more genres in Japan. Like, we can learn a lot from Japan, but that's not the only solution. Japan has some problems too, but they're thriving. So we should be looking towards Japan to see what are they doing right that we can also do. So more genres. Independent comics are on the rise. Peter Simeti's been talking about this. The industry is going to change very soon, and the superhero genre, the big two, stuff like that, it's going down, and independent stuff is on the rise. But some of the ways we're doing independent stuff is probably not right as well. And I'll get and that'll brings me to my next point: the power of pulp. Um, Pulp comic books, or just pulp fiction. I'm not talking about the movie, but like this idea of kind of this quick storytelling, or almost like throwaway um, books. That I don't like to say throwaway, because it says like they're not important, but they are important. But just these kind of stories that you can get in on at a cheaper price, and more story for your buck, and you know there's just something to it, and that's, again, Peter Smeti's doing some cool things with that. For $1.50 you can get a floppy comic. That's, with inflation, that's where comics should be right now. That's the price. But they're selling them for $5, even $8 for one floppy comic. That's ridiculous. For $9.99, for $10, you can get one of these 150 pages of comics. Or you can go to your local comic book shop and for $8 get 25 pages or 24 pages, or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. So there's power in that kind of storytelling. Another thing we can learn from manga is there's less words. If you look in a lot of typical American comics, there's a lot more words. And comic books is a visual medium, and we need to emphasize that visual. Even in prose writing, there's that common phrase, show don't tell. And in comics, sometimes, even in comics, we're trying to tell more than we show. But typically, and if you were to look at, if you were to count up the number of words, in a manga page compared, to a American page, typically there's going to be a lot less. And they just emphasize the visuals more than they do the words. And there's been different trends and stuff in the past where there's been more or less words and stuff depending on what stuff. But I'm just saying, that's something to think about, something that we can maybe learn from Japanese comics. And it depends on your type of story too, of course. So I'm not saying that has to be a thing. It's just something to think about, a possible thing that could be helpful. So yeah. In manga comics, they have a voting system. A lot of times they have these big collective, Shonen Jump kind of books, and there's a voting system where the people who read, the readers, vote on what they think is the best comic, and those ones rise to the tops, and the ones that don't get voted kind of go, they get discontinued in the magazines. It's curated by the fans, not by some editors who think they know what the fans want. Maybe there's a way we can introduce that into our what we do. I don't know how to do that, but it's something to think about. These are the things we should be thinking about and talking about, not the problems. Look at the solutions. Let's try to figure out the solutions. They get out more stories more quick. What we get out, what it takes us a month to create, they create in a week. They create I don't know how many pages, to be honest, but they create new stories every week for some of these manga. Sometimes they have big teams. Sometimes it's not big teams. It depends, and it depends. They might have a different art style. They're also not working in color. Maybe that's part of the key. That brings me to the black and white thing. Like, most manga are in black and white. Most American comics are in color. Like, that one I'm not sure about. I don't understand. Like, I wonder if they were able to do manga in color, would they even sell more? I don't know. Maybe black and white is better. I've always been had the bias that color is better, but I'm starting to rethink that. And I'm starting to enjoy black and white more because I'm starting to read more manga, and I really like their storytelling. So yeah, weak storytelling chops. I mean, it's subjective. It's you can't really um, sit here and say what's what, but to me, I don't. If I read a manga, a lot of times I get a better, more cohesive story. I don't know. I mean, there's good stories in American comics, as well. But there's been a long history of just comics in general not having the greatest stories at times. I mean, even back in the old days. So, I mean, to me, this whole thing, a big part of the solution pivots on story. So the better we get at storytelling, the better we're going to be. The more we're going to be able to reach out and get more, expand the market and things like that. I already mentioned more story for your money. Again, 150 pages, $9. You don't get that, in America. So even with Alterna, I don't think, let's see, maybe you would get up to 150 pages if you got, however, $9 worth or $10 worth of comics. So, more distribution channels. We need to just be thinking about these things. Like, how could we find other ways to distribute our comic? There's a lot of different ways. There's, even digitally, there's a lot of different ways. You can go Gumroad. Is how I've been doing part of it. Patreon's how I've been doing part of it. But there's also, obviously Comixology, Drive-Through Comics. I mean, Amazon, Kindle. I've been following this guy Chris Fox on YouTube, and he talks about writing to market, and just go on Amazon and start doing research on, maybe, I don't know about graphic novels, maybe graphic novels, do research on that, read the comments of graphic novels. There you can see, what people like and what people don't, and what they did and didn't like about that particular story. That's all good information. That's helpful. You can go and see what novels, are being sold within kind of a genre that you'd like to play, and see what's popular, see what they're saying about it, and if you look through those things, you can maybe target, your next comic idea towards something that's more marketable. Because, a lot of us kind of do this backwards. I mean, meaning, like, if you were to just focus on a business and you weren't an artist, it was a different kind of business, just putting out products or whatever. A lot of times what people will say who know about this kind of stuff is, you want to create a product that has a demand, that has a market, and we don't tend to do that, these days in American comics. They have done that in the past. I mean, there has been that situation, but there is something to having a story that you already have that you want to put out there, and kind of going on faith to a certain degree. But that's cool, and that's something that I do a lot. I mean, right now I'm making a comic about a skateboarding, corn cob, skateboarding vegetables. Like, where's that market? I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm not saying don't do your thing if it's not like within this market or whatever, but it is worth considering. Maybe there's something that you'd be interested in creating that hits upon a market that is out there, that's bigger than just the typical superhero genre. Maybe you happen to be interested in that kind of thing. I mean, romance is one of the biggest novel selling novels on Kindle and Amazon. If you are into that kind of story, but you're like a comic book artist and you're into that kind of thing, but you're like, oh well, romance comics aren't doing that well, that's not like a big thing. There's a market out there for romance. Do it, make it happen, and do it well, and put a comic out and see if you can target the same people who are buying these romance novels. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not saying you're going to get the same kind of money as the romance novels, but you might get a lot more. You might get a lot more traction in readers than your typical indie comic person. If you're passionate about that. You know, Sci-fi is a big one. You go into the sci-fi genre, and that's big in comics kind of today too. Horror, things like that. But maybe you can pinpoint to something that's a little bit. Maybe people are really into vampire. They were really into vampires at one point. Maybe you could do a vampire story because you're into that kind of thing, anyways. And maybe you can gear it a little bit towards the stuff that because those details aren't important. It's the story, it's the inner development of the actual characters in the story that's important. So some of these other things, like vampires and werewolves or whatever it is, like Cthulhu or something like that, you can just inject the story you want to tell into a lot of these different things. So I mean, it's just worth thinking about. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it is right to market, but it's worth thinking about at least. This is, we need to get more distribution channels. Getting Just coming up with ideas of how to get your comics into more people's hands in whatever you don't. I mean, local comic shops. Let's do that. Yes, that's part of the equation. That's an important piece to the whole puzzle. Um, Comic conventions, things like that. There's the typical ways, but there's also not so typical ways. Think outside of the box, try to figure out new ways to get your comics into other people's hands. People have been talking about possibly getting back into newsstands and stuff like that, things like that. Maybe you can go to some kind of library event or school things, or depending on what kind of comic you have, there's all kinds of different ways that you can get your stuff out there. um, and you be inventive, be creative about the marketing. That's the thing, is like, we think of creativity only as creating the art and the story for the comic, but the best marketing is actually creative marketing. That's a very imagination and creativity in marketing and in business is one of the most valuable assets in really everything. Even in science it is. um, there's so many quotes about that, like with Einstein and stuff, like talking about imagination and how important it is. um, Showcasing the stories, making that, highlighting, magnify the stories, magnify your characters, do things that attract readers. That's something I've been harping on and trying to figure out myself. I'm trying to crack that nut, because I think, like with YouTube and stuff, a lot of myself and my friends have YouTube channels, and a lot of times we create content that attracts other comic book creators. That's great and all, like, that's awesome. That's been an awesome community, something I'm very interested in continuing forever. But you know we need to highlight our actual stories, and not only that, people, when this whole stuff with like Twitter and people arguing with each other within the industry, and if you look at what Marvel and DC put out on their social media, like, it's not highlighting the characters, it's not showcasing the stories. Most of the time it's about all kinds of different other stuff, and it's like, we spend all this time on these stories and we care about comics, and then we don't even let people know about it. If we just did that, that would start raising the ships. If we all just did that, that would start raising the ships. You know, if I make Superman, I want Superman to be the thing that is known. I don't care if I'm known as much. I mean, how many people know about Harry Potter, and how many people know about J.K. Rowling? You know, like, a lot of people do know about J.K. Rowling, but, like, you know, I was just thinking, like, I grew up loving Terminator 1, Terminator 2, things like that. I barely knew that James Cameron was the director. You know, I don't really, with movies, I don't really spend as much time like learning about the creators as I do with like comics and stuff like that. But I'm a creator, you know, so what about your typical person? Like, some people do, some readers know a lot about the creators. But you know about the actual property first. People know about Harry Potter. How many kids out there are so into Harry Potter and can't name the name of the author? Who I mean, the author part is cool. It's cool that that's part of the marketing strategy. But showcase, highlight, magnify the actual creations. Make that front and center stage. Make it as amazing story as you can, and showcase that. And that's what people come to read comics for. So there's that. I talked about Amazon. Now, independent comics are kind of the future. At least this is from what I'm understanding of the market. People are going to get sick of the superhero stuff. I think some of them already are. I have a long time ago gotten sick of not superhero, but just the Marvel and DC stuff. Like, I still like it. I still enjoy some of the movies and stuff, and I'll draw some stuff from it once in a while, and that's cool. Like, I dig it to a certain extent, but for the most part, I've been on this independent thing since Image Comics started, basically, and even a little bit before then. And that's just me, though, and maybe I'm rare, but the thing is if we want to expand the market, we have to reach out with more genres. Independent, I say independent, but it's only because they're doing, we're talking about like Image Comics. Image Comics is the biggest example here, and we're talking about basically non-superhero comics, but they could be superhero too, but just a whole different take on it. And I mean, do a superhero comic, but make it one story that just isn't all convoluted by these shared universes. I mean, Invincible's a good example of that. But one thing that's different between these and these is this is still manga comics are still pulp comics. They're still black and white, not the greatest paper quality, fast-paced, deadline-oriented storytelling, escapism storytelling. And, they're not Image Comic. They're like Image Comics, but pulpy. You know what I mean? So they're different genres. They're kind of like all over the place with storytelling. They tell one story. These are all things that Image Comics and manga shares, but they're kind of more on the artsy fartsy side. Image Comics is, and they're beautiful art and the writing, and it takes time, and they come out. They usually don't come out on a super quick basis. Some of them do, but they're probably planned in advance. But then, there's Saga, that's a big one, or Walking Dead. Those ones, they do come out on a regular basis. Invincible did for a while, for its run, Is it still going? I think it's ended by now, but if not, it's getting close to it. And there's many other examples. But, what if they could get more out? In the case of comics, quantity kind of does trump quality, or is better. I shouldn't say trump, but quantity kind of, in some ways, is more important than quality. I mean, I'm not saying make bad comics, but I'm saying maybe there's a way where you can kind of do both. Maybe there, I don't know, you know. So as an independent creator, one man band type of thing, it's really hard to do some of these things, but it's worth thinking about. I'm not saying that I know all the answers here. I'm saying these are some of the things we need to be thinking about. We need to recognize the problem, but not dwell on the problem, and look towards the solutions. And these are some of the solutions, things that we can learn from a thriving comic market. We don't necessarily have to imitate them and make digest size black and white comics that read from right to left. And try to actually hit the manga market, although that might be an interesting way to go about it too if you're really into this kind of stuff. I've thought about it. But there's other examples of people who've done something similar. I'll show you. I happen to have them right here. These are two creators that I'm really inspired by. James Stokoe made this wonton soup book, and Corey Lewis Shark Knife, and they're both very kind of manga oriented. They're black and white kind of, but they read from from left to right, so they're like almost like an American version of a manga comic. I don't know. I think it's pretty awesome. One thing with these though is I love these books. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but they're very indie, weird type of stories, sort of, and I don't know. Maybe America's just wasn't. I mean, I think they've done well with these books, but maybe America isn't ready to support something like this, like they're ready to support something like this, or like Japan's ready to support something like this. I don't know. Maybe we just need to keep knocking on that door until we crack that nut, Those are two metaphors that, whatever. But I think you get what I mean, I don't know. Let's think about the solutions and try to do some different things, try to incorporate and do right the things that some of the comic industry is doing wrong, So what I want to know from you is, what are some of the things that you think could be solutions for, for kind of getting these ships to stop sinking? Is there things we can do as indie creators? Or is it better to kind of get within the system of Marvel and try to do something, or DC? I don't know. There's so many things. What are some of the solutions? What are things that we can learn from manga comics that I didn't bring up? Is there something you can point out, or learn from other comic book movements that have been successful? What am I not thinking of that can be helpful? I'd love to know. I want to continue this discussion because we have opportunity now to really make a mark with comics in a way that we didn't have before, sort of. But every generation there's different opportunities, and we have a lot of opportunity, especially with the advent of internet and stuff like that, and just the way things have been moving more in an indie. I mean, it's not there yet, but it may be moving more towards an indie, or more genres opening up, I should say, than your typical superhero stuff. So I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate you guys for hanging in there with me. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I hope it's been helpful. And comics is powerful. It's a powerful medium, and it seems like it's sick and dying, but there's no reason why we can't revive it. It's not dead yet. And I don't think it ever will die. It'll always at least limp along. But there's no reason why we can't get it back to thriving. And there's some people doing some interesting things. Keep watching, Peter Cimenti and what he's doing with Alterna, and keep watching Image Comics and other indie things, and watch Marvel and DC to see bad examples as well. They're doing some things right too, for sure. I mean, obviously they're the number one sellers in America for that type of comic. So, but look at what they're doing and see what they do right. Maybe imitate that. See what they're doing wrong. Try to do something different. That's all I'm really trying to say here. So hopefully, again, that was helpful. Again, I'm Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com. You can find my comics at DonkeyJawProjects.com/comics. And let's make this thing happen. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.